boombox the size of a suitcase thunders atop a milk crate throne, while a DJ slices up bass line with frenetic scratches. Cardboard mats sprawl across the basketball court like runways. B-boys spin windmills so fast their Adidas stripes blur. Shell toes squeak as they posture into freezes, arms folded, heads cocked. Girls in bamboo earrings chant the call and response, "Yes, yes, y'all," as a circle forms around the night's undisputed king of footwork. For a moment, the entire block pulses to one heartbeat. Trains clatter overhead, car alarms chirp, hydrants gush, and yet the music reigns supreme. Kids who can't afford summer camp shared icy and quarter waters, reciting rhymes about dreams bigger than the skyline, blinking in the distance. It feels unstoppable, this raw, joyous rebellion built on rhythm, swagger, and hope. The beat is still there, echoing through basements and tapes traded hand to hand, but the air smells different now. Acrid, chemical. Crack vials crunch like ice beneath timberlands. Abandoned brownstones once used for block parties are gutted and dark, windows boarded, doors kicked in. Streetlights flicker over young faces hollowed by addiction. This is New York City's crack epidemic, and the men, women, and children whose lives were affected. We begin with one of New York City's most feared figures, whose life journey encapsulates both the brutality of the streets and the profound possibilities of redemption. Ruling a crack cocaine empire with ruthless precision, and co-founding one of Queens' most notorious organizations, the infamous Supreme Team.
Gerald Miller is born and raised in the South Jamaica neighborhood of Queens, New York. He grows up in the Baisley Park houses, an area that would later become the Supreme Team's stronghold. As a youth, Miller is exposed to the turbulent climate of 1970s NYC, notably the 1973 police killing of 10-year-old Clifford Glover in Queens leaves a deep impression on him. This early trauma is said to have taught Miller not to show weakness on the streets. Miller also becomes involved with the 5% Nation, a religious, cultural movement popular in inner-city New York, from which many Supreme Team members drew inspiration. Still in his teens, Miller enters the drug trade under the wing of his uncle, Kenneth Supreme McGriff. In 1981, Miller co-founded the Supreme Team, a street drug organization based in South Jamaica, Queens. Operating out of the Baisley Park projects, the gang begins as a crew of local teenagers, many 5%ers, and quickly grows into a major crack cocaine enterprise. Miller, nicknamed Prince, serves as Supreme's second-in-command from the outset. By the mid-1980s, the Supreme Team is earning enormous profits, reportedly up to $200,000 per day at its 1987 peak, and are known for violence used to protect its territory. 1985. Supreme McGriff is arrested on state narcotics charges and sent to prison, Elmira State Prison. At this point, 21-year-old Miller effectively takes over day-to-day leadership of the Supreme Team on the streets. Miller gains a reputation for being vicious and unforgiving in running the organization. Under his leadership in the mid-80s, dozens of people were beaten, tortured, or murdered as the gang enforced its rule. Miller's willingness to use violence earns him fear and respect in equal measure. Local newspapers begin referring to him as Mr. Untouchable, drawing comparisons to John Gotti's Teflon Don moniker, because for a time, no charges would stick to him. While imprisoned, McGriff Supreme faces new federal charges. He is convicted of engaging in a continuing criminal enterprise, CCE, and after a plea deal is sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. This leaves Miller fully in charge of the gang. In 1987, the Supreme Team's drug business is at its height. The crew sells thousands of crack vials a week and controls a wide swath of Southside Jamaica, from Liberty Ave at 171st to Sutphin Boulevard. Miller runs the operation like a military organization with a strict chain of command and security. He employs armed enforcers, rooftop lookouts with radios, and uses coded 5%er language for communication. That year, Miller and the incarcerated McGriff allegedly ordered at least 8 homicides to eliminate rivals and suspected informants. One target was a gang member turned informant, James Page. Upon learning Page was cooperating, McGriff ordered him killed, and a Supreme Team hit was executed in 1987. Miller is incarcerated on state charges for a brief period, a short prison stint on an unrelated case. Around the same time, a joint NYPD-FBI task force targets the Supreme Team. In late 1987, authorities raid the gang's stash houses and safe locations, seizing weapons, drugs, cash, and documents. The crew was tipped off just before the raid and managed to remove 11 kilograms of cocaine and $200,000 in cash. But law enforcement still collected significant evidence. Following this crackdown, and under orders from the imprisoned McGriff, the Supreme Team temporarily shuts down operations to avoid further heat. Spring 1989. Gerald Prince Miller is released from state prison in the early part of 1989. Almost immediately, he works to rebuild the Supreme Team from its dormant state. Miller regains control of 2 lucrative drug-dealing spots, bases, in the Baisley Park area and reorganizes the crew. The revamped Supreme Team now has Miller at the top, with lieutenants like Wilfredo Arroyo as his deputy and Harry Big C Hunt as his bodyguard. Other key members include Ernesto Puerto Rican Righteous Pinella, security head, Roy Pookie Hale, Shannon Jimenez, Julio Hernandez, enforcers, and Ronald Tucker and Waverly Teddy Coleman, who manage retail spots. This tight-knit crew resumes the crack trade, and although profits are smaller than in the mid-'80s, they still gross around $10,000 per day by late 1989. The street violence also resumes. Miller beefs up his security detail and doesn't hesitate to use intimidation or murder to maintain control. The rebuilt Supreme Team commits some of its most brazen, violent crimes under Miller's command. In July 1989, 4 Colombian drug suppliers who had been introduced to the gang are robbed and murdered. Later, testimony accused Miller and his men of killing the Colombians and stealing their cocaine, though the victims were never identified and jurors were not convinced beyond a doubt. In August 1989, a rogue associate, Gus Rivera, is marked for death after being deemed a liability. Miller's Lieutenant Arroyo has Rivera shot in the head in Baisley Park. Rivera survives the first attempt but is eventually tracked down to a motel and executed by the crew. Around the same time, Miller orchestrates the double murder of 2 Colombian suppliers, Fernando Suarez and Pablo Perlaza. Luring them to an apartment under the pretense of a deal, Miller's henchmen tie plastic bags over the men's heads and beat them with a bat, suffocating them, then dump the bodies in Queens. These grisly episodes underscore Miller's reputation. Prince was the killer. March 1990. Miller's violent reign comes to an end after extensive investigations, including months of wiretaps on the gang's operations through late 1989. authorities move in. Gerald Prince Miller is captured in March 1990, along with several of his top lieutenants. This bust effectively dismantles the Supreme Team's active operations on the street. Miller, now in federal custody awaiting trial, faces the prospect of charges that could put him away for life. Federal indictments are unsealed against Miller and his cohorts in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York, Brooklyn. Miller is charged with leading a continuing criminal enterprise, racketeering, RICO, and large-scale narcotics distribution conspiracy, among other counts. In a major trial, prosecutors present evidence of the Supreme Team's drug revenues and a pattern of violence, including murders from 1987-1989, to tie Miller to the enterprise. Multiple gang members turn witness against their former leaders, detailing the inner workings of the operation. In 1993, Gerald Prince Miller is convicted on all major counts. He receives a sentence of life in federal prison without parole. In fact, the judge imposes 7 concurrent life terms, plus additional years for money laundering, ensuring Miller will never be freed under the sentencing laws of the time. Co-defendants like Arroyo and Hunt also receive life terms, while others receive lengthy prison sentences. Miller, only in his late 20s at sentencing, begins serving what was then expected to be the rest of his life behind bars. In 1997, Miller's case makes its way through appeals. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals upholds the convictions and life sentences for Miller and most co-defendants, rejecting various challenges regarding wiretap evidence, jury selection, etc. One technical victory for Miller was the appellate court's agreement that he should not have been convicted of both the drug conspiracy and the CCE, since the conspiracy was a lesser-included offense. However, this had no practical effect on his sentence because the life term for the CCE remained in place. With his appeals exhausted by the late 1990s, Prince Miller settles into the reality of long-term federal imprisonment. In 2002, federal authorities indicted Kenneth Supreme McGriff again, this time in connection with multiple murders, including the 2001 killings of 2 rival drug dealers, allegedly revenge for an associate's death. Supreme's high-profile ties to music mogul Irv Gotti and Murder Incorporated Records draw national attention to the case. In 2007, McGriff was convicted of racketeering and murder for hire and is sentenced to life in prison without parole, avoiding the sought-after death penalty. By that point, both uncle and nephew, Supreme and Prince, are serving life terms in federal penitentiaries. Miller spends these years in facilities such as FCC Allenwood, Pennsylvania, and later USP Big Sandy, Kentucky, with no expectation of release. However, even in prison, he maintains connections to the outside. Family remains essential. Miller is a father, having had children before or during incarceration, and eventually a grandfather as well. By all accounts, he stays in touch with relatives and his South Jamaica community from behind the walls. Late 2010s. After being locked up for roughly 30 years, Miller begins to garner support for a second chance. In 2018, journalist filmmaker Don Sikorsky starts communicating with Miller at Allenwood Federal Prison. Sikorsky conducts hundreds of phone calls, emails, and visits with Miller over a 5-year period. Through these exchanges, Sikorsky observes a transformation in Miller. He now describes Prince as a reflective, changed man, a father and grandfather who fully understands his past mistakes and exhibits a strong ethical code. Miller expresses that he wants no glorification of his drug days, but instead to highlight the injustices of the 1980s crack era and the toll of mass incarceration. Sikorsky becomes an advocate, even writing a letter to the federal judge, Judge Nicholas Garofis, in support of Miller's potential release. September 2024. After serving 32 years in federal custody, Gerald Prince Miller is finally released from prison. In early September, Judge Nicholas Garofis granted Miller's motion for a sentence reduction under newly enacted reforms. A recent legal change made federal inmates over age 55 convicted of non-violent offenses eligible for consideration for release. Miller's convictions were for drug racketeering, technically categorized as non-violent, and he had no violent crime convictions on his record, despite his notorious past. Around September 7, 2024, news of Miller's impending freedom breaks on social media, and by September 11, 2024, he is officially released from USP Big Sandy in Kentucky. The Source magazine even obtained a text message from Miller's wife and brother, confirming that Prince was coming home. At age around 56, Miller walks out of prison a free man, something that would have seemed impossible just a few years prior. His release comes just after the Showtime documentary. It is seen as a real-life epilogue to the story of the Supreme Team. Hip-hop artist LL Cool J, who had idolized the Supreme Team figures in his youth, publicly congratulates Miller, and many in Queens express well wishes for his re-entry.
Miller returns to his family in New York. After being away for over 3 decades, he has to readjust to society. By all accounts, he is focused on positive endeavors. On social media, Miller and those managing his accounts speak about using his leadership skills for positive change and steering young people away from the path he took. Plans are underway for a new documentary film or memoir centered on Miller's own life story, billed as a journey from legend to legacy, which aims to show how he transitioned from infamy to redemption. Having paid his debt to society, Gerald Prince Miller positions himself as a cautionary tale and mentor figure for at-risk youth in his community. May 2025. Friends, family, and supporters organize a grand welcome home celebration for Gerald Prince Miller in Queens. On May 9th, 2025, a welcome home party is held at Club Amazura, a popular venue in Jamaica, Queens, to honor Miller's return. The event is like a who's who of Queens street lore and hip-hop. Attendees reportedly include hip-hop stars such as Nas and Jadakiss, alongside former Supreme Team associates, though notably, Bimmy Anthony, another well-known Supreme Team member, does not show up. The party celebrates Miller's 59th birthday around that time, and his freedom, with many locals coming out to see the once infamous Prince, now free. Miller is greeted with respect and curiosity, a symbol of a bygone era now looking to start a new chapter. Gerald Prince Miller is living life on the outside for the first time since 1990. He remains very close to his family. He is a proud grandfather and is rebuilding relationships with his children after so many lost years. Publicly, Miller has expressed remorse for his past and gratitude for a second chance. He has been engaging in community outreach, speaking about the dangers of the drug game that once made him rich and feared. A new documentary project about Miller's life and lessons is reportedly in production, signaling that he is ready to tell his story in full as a warning and inspiration.
Gerald Prince Miller's journey from a South Jamaica teenager in the crack era to the top of a drug empire, to decades in prison, and now to hopeful elder statesman, stands as a remarkable life arc, one that is documented through public records and popular culture spanning over 50 years. This is the story of Gerald Prince Miller.